Unsolved for years, the disappearance of vulnerable women in Canada's poorest neighborhood became one of the country's deepest true crime scars. This story, spanning decades, is not just about the monster caught in 2002 on a pig farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, but about a massive systemic failure, a prolonged tragedy, and the institutional malice that left dozens of women to perish. The shadow of Robert William Pickton fell over the downtown Eastside DTES of Vancouver starting as early as 1978, stretching into the new millennium. The DTES was, and remains, a neighborhood defined by extreme poverty, homelessness, addiction, and sex work, a place where the lives of marginalized individuals, many of whom were Indigenous women, were deemed disposable by society. These women were not merely statistics, they were individuals like Serena Abotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda and Wolf, Georgina Papine, and Marnie Fry, mothers, daughters, and sisters whose struggles were exploited by a man who thrived on their vulnerability. The tragic truth behind the victim psychology and profiles is rooted in Canada's colonial history. Many of the women were Indigenous, facing intergenerational trauma stemming from the residential school system, which stripped their parents and grandparents of their culture, language, and family support structures. This historical dispossession led directly to the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in the high-risk environment of the DTES, making them uniquely vulnerable to predators like Pickton. Their struggles with addiction, often a coping mechanism for profound historical pain, were weaponized by both the killer and the society that refused to look for them. Pickton exploited their need for money or a place to stay, offering small amounts of cash or promises of a safe haven before subjecting them to unimaginable brutality. The systemic discrimination, the failure to protect them because they were Indigenous, poor, or sex workers, was a critical component of the malice that enabled the crimes. The failure to address their vanishing was rooted in a profound, systemic bias. Police and public opinion implicitly or explicitly categorized these women as high risk, suggesting that their transient lifestyles made their disappearances inevitable and not worthy of serious investigation. To fully grasp the scope of this crime, we must analyze the killer's past and psychological profile. Robert William Pickton was born in 1949 and grew up on the family farm in Port Coquitlam, just outside Vancouver. His early life was marked by extreme isolation and emotional neglect. Raised primarily by his domineering mother, who worked the farm alongside him, Pickton exhibited traits of social ineptitude and odd behavior from childhood. He never completed high school and was known around Port Coquitlam as the eccentric pig farmer. This simple, unthreatening persona became his most effective camouflage, allowing him to appear harmless while harboring dark secrets. Experts would later classify his profile not as a classic mastermind, but as a disorganized serial killer who capitalized on social indifference and geographical isolation. His primary psychological drive was likely rooted in a sense of absolute power and control over the lives he deemed worthless, a chilling echo of the societal view of his victims. He exploited the very anonymity and lack of protection afforded to women in the DTES. Psychologically, Pickton displayed traits consistent with a psychopathic spectrum, masked by a low-functioning exterior. His meticulous documentation of his crimes and his later boastful confession to the undercover officer suggest a deep-seated need for recognition for his horrific acts, even as he maintained the public facade of a simple farmer. Pickton and his brother David turned a barn on the property into an unlicensed, often chaotic nightclub called Piggy's Palace, attracting a wide range of visitors, including bikers and sex workers, further providing a seemingly legitimate, though unsavory, context for his interactions with his future victims. This enabled him to blend into the background, operating his sinister hobby right under the nose of local law enforcement, the RCMP. For years, families pleaded, activists organized, and reports piled up at the Vancouver Police Department (VPD) regarding the missing women. The police response, fueled by an implicit bias, was often to dismiss the reports. Early warnings from members of the DTS community and women who had escaped Pickton were routinely ignored or downplayed. The common response, which fueled immense controversy, was a claim that the women were simply transient or had moved to other provinces. This devastating indifference allowed the killer to operate unimpeded, The full chronology of police neglect is damning, featuring multiple points where the serial killer could have been stopped. The most catastrophic failure occurred in March 1997. Pickton was charged with the attempted murder, assault, and forcible confinement of a sex worker, Wendy Lynn Eisteter, whom he had lured to the farm. During the violent encounter, Pickton managed to handcuff one of her wrists before she fought back desperately, grabbing a knife and severely cutting Pickton's throat. She was able to flee, naked and bleeding, to the road where a passerby rushed her to the hospital. Pickton drove himself to the same hospital for his injuries, with the key to her handcuffs still in his pocket. This was an instance of overwhelming physical evidence and clear witness testimony, the evidence of his crime literally in his possession, just feet from his victim. Yet, despite Eisteter's testimony and clear evidence of violence on the property, the Crown bizarrely stayed the attempted murder charge 1 year later, in January 1998. The official reason cited was the victim's perceived lack of credibility due to her drug use and junkie status, as detailed in subsequent reports. This decision was a catastrophic error, effectively giving Pickton a license to continue his reign of terror for another 4 years, during which time he is believed to have claimed many more lives. This failure to prosecute, driven by the systemic discrimination against the victim's profile, epitomizes the institutional malice of a system that failed to value the lives of the women. The true breakthrough came serendipitously in February 2002, when RCMP officers executed a search warrant on the Pickton farm, initially for illegal firearms, but soon expanded it as part of the missing women investigation. What they found was a forensic nightmare: clothing, jewelry, and personal items belonging to the missing women. The subsequent excavation of the pig farm was unprecedented in Canadian history, involving hundreds of officers, forensic specialists, and archaeologists sifting through tons of soil and pig remains in a painstaking process that lasted for over a year and cost millions of dollars. DNA evidence linked Pickton to 33 women, leading him to be charged with 27 counts of first-degree murder. During a secretly recorded conversation with an undercover RCMP officer placed in his jail cell, Pickton chillingly confessed to murdering 49 women, claiming he wanted to reach a neat 50, but got sloppy. His methods of disposal, which involved dismemberment and feeding some remains to his pigs, contributed to the extreme difficulty in identifying and recovering the victims, adding another layer to the case's complexity. The trial began in 2007. The prosecution, facing overwhelming evidence and the logistical challenge of trying 27 murder counts, made the controversial decision to proceed with a trial on only 6 counts of second-degree murder. Serena Abotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda and Wolf, Georgina Papine, and Marnie Fry. This legal strategy, aimed at simplifying the complex evidence by focusing on victims with the strongest forensic links, caused profound tragedy and further pain for the families of the other 20 charged victims, whose day in court would never come. Their controversies and suspicions centered on the legal system, sacrificing full accountability for the sake of prosecutorial efficiency, a decision many viewed as another betrayal of the marginalized victims. On December 9, 2007, Pickton was convicted on all 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty under Canadian law. The remaining 20 charges were stayed, meaning they were formally put on hold and never prosecuted. This decision remains a painful point of contention and a symbol of incomplete justice for the victims' families, who were left without final legal closure regarding their loved one's fate. The social reaction, media coverage, and internet/online discussion reactions to the case were multifaceted. Initial media coverage of the missing women was minimal, often subtly blaming the women for their high-risk lifestyle. This early media silence was a direct reflection of the institutional apathy and a major failure by the press to amplify the voices of the victims' families. However, once Pickton was apprehended, the media narrative shifted to one of shock and horror, creating an international sensation. Online discussions erupted, fueling anger not just at the killer's brutality, but at the systemic neglect of the police forces, with many viewing the indifference shown to the women as a form of societal violence. The public inquiry into the police handling of the case, known as the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, MWCI, and led by Commissioner Wally Oppel, confirmed the public suspicions. The final report concluded that a series of systemic failures, including a lack of coordination between the VPD and the RCMP and institutional bias against marginalized women, were directly responsible for Pickton operating for so long. Advocacy groups and families, however, criticized the inquiry for being too easy on the police and for failing to deliver true justice or meaningful reform, stating that the system failed to fully look inward at its own role. The pervasive feeling was that the state's inaction contributed directly to the victims' deaths. The actionable conclusion plus analysis, reflection, lessons learned of this case is critical for the pursuit of truth. The Robert Pickton case is intrinsically linked to the broader, ongoing national crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MILG, in Canada. The lessons learned here are not merely about one killer, but about a national failure to protect its most vulnerable citizens. We must acknowledge that the systemic failures, racism, sexism, and classism, that allowed Pickton to operate are still present in Canadian society, particularly in how missing persons reports involving marginalized individuals are treated. To prevent similar tragedies, communities must compel political leaders to fully fund and implement the 231 calls for justice from the National Inquiry into MILG. This includes structural reforms within police departments to eliminate implicit and explicit bias in investigations, providing adequate housing, addiction, and support services in vulnerable communities, like the DTES, and ensuring that all missing persons reports are treated with urgency and respect, regardless of the victim's background or lifestyle. Furthermore, the legal system must develop mechanisms to address the grievances of families whose loved ones' murder charges were stayed for procedural convenience, ensuring their right to accountability is never dismissed. The pursuit of truth in this case did not end with the conviction of Pickton. It must continue through relentless pressure for systemic change, ensuring that the lives of vulnerable individuals in the DTES are never again deemed expendable and that the victims of Robert Pickton are fully and respectfully remembered.